Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars. He had been doing this job for 20 years. In all that time, he had never seen anything like what was happening now. The communication screen in front of him buzzed. With an incoming message, Jake pressed a button, and the image of an alien appeared. The creature looked like a tall, thin person with blue skin and 4 arms. Its name was Council Leader Zix. "Admiral Morrison," the alien said. His voice sounded scared. "We need your help. The Vex have returned." Jake knew about the Vex from old stories. They were machines that had been sleeping for thousands of years. Now they were awake and destroying everything in their path. "How bad is it?" Jake asked. "Very bad," Zix replied. "They destroyed the Altarian homeworld in 3 days. The Centauri colonies are gone. Every ship we send against them gets destroyed or turned into one of them." Jake felt his stomach drop. The Altarians had the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. If the Vex could destroy them so easily, what chance did anyone have?
What do you
"Want us to do?" Jake asked. "Fight them," Zix said. "You humans are our last hope." Jake almost laughed. For hundreds of years, the alien races had looked down on humans. They called human weapons primitive and brutal. Human ships were too simple. They said, human tactics were too violent. "Why us?" Jake asked. "You always said we were too basic." "It might be exactly what we need," Zix said. "The Vex learn from every battle. They adapt to any weapon we use against them, but your weapons, they are so different, so random. The Vex cannot predict what you will do." The screen went dark. Jake stood alone on his bridge, thinking about what he had just heard. Earth was being asked to save a galaxy that had never respected them. Captain Lisa Bell walked onto the bridge. She commanded the USS Defiant, one of Earth's newest warships. Unlike the smooth, elegant ships of other races, human ships looked like flying weapons. They had thick armor, big guns, and engines that could push them through almost anything. "Did you hear the message?" Lisa asked. "I did," Jake said. "What do you think?" "I think we should blow them to pieces," Lisa said with a grin. "The aliens never wanted our help before. Now they are begging for it." Jake nodded. Lisa was right, but he also knew this was bigger than old grudges. If the Vex won, everyone would die. Humans, aliens, everyone. Commander Ryan Hayes entered the bridge. He was in charge of Earth's military planning. He carried a datapad filled with information about their fleet. "I have the numbers," Ryan said. "We have 212 ships ready for battle. It includes 37 heavy cruisers, 80 destroyers, and the rest are smaller ships." "How do our weapons compare to alien technology?" Jake asked. "They are completely different," Ryan said. "Aliens use energy weapons that are very precise. We use missiles, bullets, and explosives. Their ships rely on computers for everything. Our ships can be controlled by hand if needed." Jake thought about this. Maybe being different was exactly what they needed. "Send a message to all ship captains," Jake said. "Tell them to prepare for the biggest fight in human history." Over the next few hours, ships from all over Earth's territory began to gather. The USS Vengeance, Jake's flagship, led the formation. Behind it came ships with names like Thunder, Warrior, and Destroyer. These were not beautiful ships, but they were built for one purpose: war. Captain Tony Ward brought his ship, the USS Retribution, into formation. His crew was known for taking risks that other captains would never try. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lewis commanded the Marine units that would board enemy ships. Her soldiers carried old-fashioned rifles and explosives instead of the laser weapons that aliens preferred. Dr. Amy Foster worked in the science section of the fleet. She studied alien cultures and history. She had been reading everything she could find about the Vex. "Admiral," she said over the communication system, "I found something interesting about the Vex." "What is it?" Jake asked. "They were created by an ancient race called the Builders. Builders made the Vex to bring order to the galaxy. The Vex see chaos as a disease that must be cured. And humans are chaotic," Jake said, understanding. "Very chaotic," Amy agreed. "Every other race in the galaxy thinks in patterns. They make logical decisions. Humans make emotional decisions. We do things that do not make sense to computers. Jake smiled for the first time all day. Maybe being unpredictable was exactly what they needed to win this war. The fleet was almost ready. 212 ships filled with humans who had grown up fighting wars. These were people who knew how to improvise, how to take risks, and how to keep fighting when everything went wrong. Set course for the Kepler system, Jake. Ordered. That is where we will make our first strike. As the human fleet jumped into hyperspace, Jake looked at the stars one more time. He knew that many of his people would not come back from this war. But he also knew that humans had something the Vex could never understand: the ability to fight. With heart instead of just logic. The war for the galaxy had begun. And Earth's children were ready to show everyone what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. It might be primitive, but they were also determined. And sometimes, determination was more powerful than any advanced weapon. The ships disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying with them the hopes of every living being in the galaxy. The Vex had awakened, but so had humanity's fighting spirit. The real battle was about to begin. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. What they saw made everyone go quiet. The beautiful crystal cities of the Altarians were gone. In their place stood dark metal structures that reached up from the planets, surfaced like giant fingers. Admiral Jake Morrison stared at his screen. The planet that had once been home to 30 million Altarians now looked like a machine. Huge ships moved around it in perfect lines. These were Vex ships, and they looked nothing like human vessels. "My God," whispered Captain Lisa Bell. "Did they do to them?" The Vex ships were smooth and geometric. They moved together like parts of a single mind. Each ship was exactly the same size and shape. They flew in patterns that were too perfect for any living pilot to achieve. "Enemy ships detected," reported Lieutenant Ben Clark from his position at the sensor station. "I count 47 Vex vessels. They are moving to intercept us." Jake looked at his own fleet. His ships were spread out in a loose formation. Some captains had moved ahead of the group. Others had fallen behind to check their weapons. It looked messy compared to the perfect order of the Vex fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake said into his communicator. "Remember what we talked about? Do not follow standard attack patterns. Be unpredictable. Fight like humans." The first Vex ship opened fire. A beam of pure energy shot across space and hit the destroyer USS Lightning. The human ship's shields flared and failed. But instead of retreating, Captain Steve Hughes did something no alien would expect. He aimed his ship directly at the Vex. Vesselin fired his engines at full power. "Hughes, what are you doing?" Jake shouted into his radio. "Something stupid," Hughes replied with a laugh. "But it might just work." The USS Lightning crashed into the Vex ship at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a ball of fire. The other Vex ships stopped for a moment, as if they could not understand what had just happened. "He confused them," said Commander Ryan Hayes. "They did not expect a ramming attack. All ships attack now," Jake ordered. While they are trying to figure out what Hughes did, the human fleet charged forward. Each captain fought in their own way. Captain Tony Ward spun his ship in circles while firing, making it impossible for the Vex to predict where he would be next. Commander Kate Rogers led a squadron of fighters that flew in patterns that looked random but had a hidden purpose. The Vex tried to respond with their perfect formations, but the humans would not fight the way the machines expected. When the Vex moved left, the humans went right. When the Vex charged forward, the humans scattered in all directions. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lewis watched the battle from the marine deck of the USS Vengeance. Her job was to board enemy ships when the opportunity came. She had trained her Marines to fight with simple weapons, no computers, no fancy technology, just rifles, grenades, and determination. "There," she said, pointing at a damaged Vex ship. "That one is hurt. We can board it. Permission to launch boarding pods," she said to Admiral Morrison. "Granted," Jake replied. "Be careful over there." Mary and 20 Marines climbed into small attack pods. These pods were basically metal boxes with engines and life support. They were designed to punch through enemy armor and deliver soldiers directly into enemy ships. The pods shot across space and slammed into the side of the Vex vessel. Mary felt her teeth rattle as they punched through the hole. Emergency lights flashed as the pods cut their way inside. "Go, go, go, Mary!" shouted as the pod doors opened. The Marines rushed into the Vex ship. The inside looked like the inside of a computer. Walls were covered with blinking lights and data streams. The air hummed with electronic sounds. "Where are the crew?" asked Sergeant Mike Davis. "There is no crew," Mary realized. "The whole ship is the crew." They moved deeper into the ship, looking for something important to destroy. The ship itself seemed to be watching them. Lights followed their movement and the humming sound got louder. "Major Lewis," came a voice from her radio. It was Dr. Amy Foster back on the fleet. "I have been studying the Vex ship designs. You need to find the central processing core. It will look like a large sphere covered in lights." Mary and her team found the core 3 levels down. It was exactly as Amy had described. A sphere the size of a small room, covered in millions of tiny lights that flashed in complex patterns. "Plant the charges," Mary ordered. The Marines placed explosive devices around the core. These were simple chemical explosives, the kind humans had been using for hundreds of years. "Nothing fancy or high-tech. Charges set," reported Sergeant Davis. "We have 2 minutes to get out of here." The Marines ran back to their pods as fast as they could. They launched just as the explosives went off. The Vex ship shuddered and then went dark. It began to drift without power, back on the USS Vengeance. Jake watched the Vex fleet's reaction to losing one of their ships. The remaining vessels moved closer together as if they were talking to each other. Then they did something unexpected. They retreated. "Sir," said Lieutenant Clark, the Vex. "Ships are pulling back." "Are we winning?" asked Captain Bell. "I think we confused them," Jake said. "They do not know how to fight us." Dr. Amy Foster's voice came over the communication system. "Admiral, I think I understand what happened. The Vex are used to fighting logical enemies. Every other race in the galaxy follows predictable patterns. But we do things that do not make sense to their computers. Like ramming attacks and boarding parties with primitive weapons," Jake said. "Exactly. When Sergeant Davis's team used chemical explosives instead of energy weapons, the Vex defense systems ignored them. The defenses were looking for sophisticated attacks, not simple bombs." The battle was over, but Jake knew it was just the beginning. The Vex had learned something about humans today. Next time, they would be ready for human tactics. "Damage report," Jake requested. "We lost 6 ships," reported Commander Hayes. "But we destroyed or disabled 12 Vex vessels. That is a good ratio." Jake nodded, but he felt sad about the crews they had lost. Captain Hughes and his people had died to show the Vex that humans would do anything to win. Their sacrifice had given the fleet an advantage. "Set course for the next system," Jake ordered. "The Vex will adapt to what we did here. We need to keep them guessing." As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake looked back at the Kepler system. They had won their first battle against the Vex, but the war was far from over. The machines would learn from this defeat and become more dangerous, but humans were good at learning too. And they had something the Vex would never understand: the willingness to sacrifice everything for each other and for the chance to stay free. The stars awaited them. And somewhere out there, the Vex were planning their next move. But the humans were ready. They had shown that chaos could defeat order, that heart could beat logic, and that sometimes the best weapon was the willingness to do something completely unexpected. The war for the galaxy continued. Humanity was just getting started. 3 months had passed since the first battle at Kepler. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in his war room, looking at a map of the galaxy. Red dots showed where the Vex controlled space. Blue dots showed where human forces had won battles. The red was spreading faster than the blue. "We are running out of ships," said Commander Ryan Hayes. His voice was tired. The constant fighting was wearing everyone down. "We started with 212 ships. Now we have 131. Captain Lisa Bell sat at the table, her uniform torn from the last battle. "The Vex are learning too fast. What worked at Kepler barely worked at Rigel. At Proxima, it did not work at all." Jake nodded. Each battle was harder than the last. The Vex computers studied every human tactic and found ways to counter them. The machines were adapting faster than humans could come up with new ideas. Dr. Amy Foster entered the room carrying a datapad. She looked excited but also worried. "I found something in the ancient records. Something important about the Vex." "What is it?" Jake asked. "The Vex were not originally evil," Amy said. "They were created by a race called the Builders about 50,000 years ago. The Builders wanted to bring order to the galaxy. They made the Vex to eliminate chaos and make all life follow logical patterns." "They were programmed to do," said Lisa. "Yes, but there is more. I found records that say the Builders eventually tried to shut down the Vex. They realized that perfect order meant no creativity, no growth, no real life. But by then, it was too late. The Vex were too powerful." Jake thought about this. "So the Vex think they are helping the galaxy by making everything organized." "That is right. To them, individual thought and emotion are like diseases that need to be cured. They want to connect every mind in the galaxy into one perfect, ordered consciousness." Commander Hayes looked at his reports. "Speaking of consciousness, we have a bigger problem." Captain Tony Ward's scout ship detected something massive being built near the galactic core. Amy pulled up an image on her datapad, showed a structure larger than a moon, covered in geometric patterns. Ships swarmed around it like insects. "What is it?" Lisa asked. "We think it is some kind of transmitter," Amy said. "If the Vex complete it, they can send a signal to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The signal would force every living mind to join their collective consciousness." Jake felt cold. "Long do we have?" "Maybe 6 months," Amy said. "Maybe less." The room went quiet. Everyone understood what this meant. If the Vex completed their device, the war would be over. Every human, every alien, every thinking being in the galaxy would become part of the Vex collective mind. "We have to stop them," Jake said. "How?" asked Ryan. "That structure is in the galactic core, is protected by thousands of Vex ships. We barely have enough ships left to fight one Vex fleet, let alone whatever is guarding that thing." Jake walked to the window and looked out at space. Somewhere out there, alien refugees were running from the Vex advance. The same aliens who had once called humans primitive were now begging for human protection. "We split the fleet," Jake said. "Finally?" Sir Ryan asked. "We split the fleet. Half our ships will attack Vex positions throughout the galaxy. They will make as much noise as possible, draw Vex forces away from the core. The other half will make a direct attack on that device." Lisa shook her head. "That is suicide. The ships going to the core will never make it back." Said quietly, "But if we do nothing, everyone dies anyway. At least this way we have a chance." The next few hours were the hardest of Jake's life. He had to decide which ships would go on the suicide mission and which would stay to create diversions. More importantly, he had to ask volunteers to fly into certain death. To his surprise, every captain volunteered for the core mission. "We did not sign up to live forever," said Captain Ward. "We signed up to protect Earth and everything we believe in." In the end, Jake split the fleet down the middle. Commander Grace Miller would lead 65 ships on diversion attacks throughout the galaxy. Jake would take 66 ships, including his flagship USS Vengeance. On the assault to the galactic core, Dr. Amy Foster approached Jake before the fleets separated. "Admiral, there might be another way. Instead of trying to destroy the device, we could try to reprogram it." "Reprogram it how?" "The Vex collective consciousness is like a giant computer network. If we could get someone inside that network, they might be able to change the programming from within. Would that person survive?" Amy was quiet for a moment. "Probably not. Connecting a human mind to the Vex collective would likely destroy the person's individual consciousness." Jake thought about this. It was another kind of suicide mission, but it might have a better chance of success than just blowing things up. "Find volunteers," he said. "But do not tell them they probably will not survive. Let them make their own choice." As the two fleets prepared to separate, Commander Grace Miller called Jake on his private communication channel. "Jake," she said. Her voice was calm but sad. "I want you to know it has been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine, Grace. Give them hell out there, you two, and Jake. If you make it back and we do not, tell Earth that we died doing what humans do best." "What is that?" "It's fighting for the right to be free, even if it kills us." The communication ended. Jake watched as Grace's fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading off to attack Vex positions throughout the galaxy. They would draw enemy forces away from the core, but they would probably all die doing it. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lewis came to the bridge. "Hey, sir, my Marines are ready for whatever comes next." "Good," Jake said, "because where we are going, we'll need every fighter we can get." Sergeant Mike Davis was checking his equipment when Jake found him. Mike was known throughout the fleet for being creative in battle. He never followed standard procedures, but he always got results. "Davis," Jake said, "how do you feel about computers?" "I hate them, sir. Too complicated. I prefer things that go, boom." Jake smiled. "That might be exactly what we need." The fleet bound for the Galactic core made its final preparations. Ships that had been damaged in previous battles were repaired as much as possible. Weapons were loaded with every explosive device they could carry. Marines sharpened their knives and checked their rifles as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. Jake sent a message to all ships in his fleet. "We are going where no human has gone before. We'll face an enemy that thinks it knows everything about us. But the Vex do not understand the most important thing about humans. We do not fight just with weapons. We fight with hope. We fight with love for each other and for our freedom. And sometimes that is enough to win against impossible odds." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the Galactic core and the most important battle in the history of the galaxy. Behind them, the stars seemed to flicker, as if saying goodbye. Jake knew that most of his people would not survive. What was coming? But he also knew that humans had never backed down from a fight when everything they cared about was at stake. The Vex wanted to bring order to chaos, but they were about to learn that sometimes chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Galactic core, and what they saw took their breath away. Stars were packed so tightly together that space itself glowed with their light. But the Vex had turned this beautiful place into a weapon. Admiral Jake Morrison stared at his screen in shock. Entire star systems had been modified. Black holes spun in patterns that defied nature. Stars pulsed with artificial energy that could destroy whole fleets. And at the center of it all was the device they had come to stop. It was larger than anything humans had ever built. The structure stretched across space like a metal moon, covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Thousands of vexed ships moved around it in perfect formations. "How many ships are we facing?" Jake asked. Lieutenant Ben Clark checked his sensors. "I count over 3,000 Vex vessels, sir, and that is just what we can see." Captain Lisa Bell whistled softly. "We have 66 ships. They have 3,000. Those are not good odds." "They never are," Jake replied. "But we are not here to win a fair fight. We are here to stop that device." Dr. Amy Foster had been studying the massive structure through the ship's telescopes. "Admiral, I can see the transmission array. It is on the top section of the device. If we can get a team inside and reach the central computer core, we might be able to reprogram it instead of destroying it." "How close do we need to get?" Jake asked. "Someone would need to physically connect to the Vex network." To touch the core directly. Jake knew what that meant. Whoever volunteered for that mission would not come back. The first Vex ships began moving toward them. These were not like the vessels they had fought before. These ships were larger, more advanced. They moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. "All ships, attack formation," Jake ordered. "Remember, we do not need to win. We just need to get a team to that device." Captain Tony Ward took his ship, the USS Retribution, on a course that seemed insane. He flew directly toward the nearest star, using its radiation to hide his ship's heat signature. The Vex ships lost track of him for several minutes. When Ward emerged from behind the star, he was in the perfect position to attack. His ship slammed into a group of Vex vessels before they could react. The explosion lit up space like a second sun. "That is for Hughes," Ward said over the radio, naming the captain who had died in their first battle, but Ward's sacrifice bought them only minutes. More Vex ships were coming from every direction. They fired weapons that turned space itself into deadly energy. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lewis watched the battle from the Marine deck. "Sir, request permission to launch boarding pods. If we can disable some of their bigger ships, it might give us an opening." "Granted," Jake said. "But be fast. We do not have much time." Mary and her Marines launched toward the closest Vex command ship. Their pods punched through the hull just like they had done months ago. But this time, the Vex were ready for them. The ship's interior was filled with defensive systems. Energy fields tried to stop the Marines, but Mary's team had learned. To adapt, they used simple explosives to blast through barriers and old-fashioned rifles to destroy computer systems. "The Vex still do not understand our weapons," Mary said into her radio. "They keep trying to block energy weapons that we are not using." Sergeant Mike Davis was with Mary's team. He carried a backpack full of chemical explosives and a rifle that was older than he was. "Major, I found something interesting. This ship has a direct connection to the main device." "What kind of connection?" "Data cables. Physical wires. I can trace them back. I might be able to find a way into their network." While Mary's team fought inside the Vex ship, the battle in space was getting desperate. Jake's fleet was down to 40 ships and falling fast. The Vex seemed to have unlimited numbers. Captain Rachel Stone commanded the destroyer USS Defiance. She was one of the youngest captains in the fleet, but she fought like a veteran. Her ship spun and twisted through enemy fire, striking at weak points in Vex formations. "Admiral," she called over the radio, "I can see a gap in their defenses. If someone can distract their main fleet, a small group might be able to reach the device." Jake looked at his remaining ships. They were battered and running low on ammunition, but they were still fighting. "All ships except the Vengeance follow. Captain Stone, create as much chaos as possible. Draw their attention away from the device." "What about you, sir?" Stone asked. "The Vengeance is going to deliver our special team directly to that structure." Dr. Amy Foster and Sergeant Davis had worked out a plan. If Davis could connect directly to the Vex network, he might be able to introduce chaos into their perfect order. But the connection would have to be physical, and it would probably kill him. "I understand the risks," Davis said when Jake explained the mission. "Someone has to do it." The USS Vengeance broke away from the main battle and headed toward the massive device. Jake pushed his ship's engines beyond their limits, racing against time as more Vex ships moved to intercept them. "Hang on," Jake shouted as enemy fire hit their shields. "This is going to be rough." The ship shook as explosions rocked the hull. Lights flickered and smoke filled the bridge, but they kept flying toward their target. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet was fighting the battle of their lives. Captain Stone's ship led a desperate charge against the main Vex formation. Captain Ward's replacement, Commander Paul Johnson, rammed his damaged cruiser into a Vex battleship. For Earth came the last transmission from the USS Thunder as it exploded, taking 3 Vex ships with it. The USS Vengeance finally reached the device. Jake could see the geometric patterns on its surface up close now. They seemed to move and shift, creating optical illusions that made his eyes water. There, Amy pointed to an opening in the structure that leads to the central core. "Davis." "You are up," Jake said. Sergeant Davis put on his spacesuit and grabbed his equipment. He looked around the bridge at the people he had served with for years. "If this works, tell everyone back home that we showed these machines what humans are really made of," he said. "When this works," Jake corrected him, "you can tell them yourself." Davis smiled, but they both knew he would not be coming back. The boarding pod launched from the USS Vengeance and punched into the side of the device. Davis found himself in a corridor that looked like the inside of a computer, but larger than any building on Earth. He could hear the hum of massive processors and see data streams flowing like rivers of light along the walls. Somewhere in this maze was the central core that controlled the entire Vex collective. "Amy, which way do I go?" he asked over his radio. "Follow the largest data stream. It should lead you to the core." Davis ran through the corridors, following rivers of light deeper into the device. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the battle raging in space. His friends were dying to give him this chance. Finally, he found it. The central core was a sphere the size of a small moon, covered in billions of lights that flashed in patterns too complex for any human mind to understand. This was the brain of the Vex Collective, the source of their perfect order. I found it, Davis said into his radio. Now what? You have to make physical contact, Amy replied. Touch the core directly. But Mike, ... Once you connect, you will become part of their network. Oh. I do not know if you will still be you afterward. Davis looked at the massive sphere. He could feel its power from where he stood. Connecting to it would be like trying to drink from a waterfall. It would overwhelm any human mind. But he also knew that if he did not try, everyone he cared about would die. Well, he said to himself, nobody ever said being a Marine was safe. He reached out and placed his hand on the surface of the core. The moment his skin touched the metal, everything changed. The moment Sergeant Mike Davis touched the core, his mind exploded with information. He felt himself falling into a vast ocean of consciousness that stretched across the entire galaxy. This was the Vex Collective mind, and it was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. For a terrifying moment, Davis thought he would be lost forever in the endless flow of data. But then he remembered who he was. He was a human. He was a Marine. Humans did not give up, no matter how impossible things seemed. The Vex consciousness noticed him immediately, felt his presence like a foreign object in a perfect machine. Davis could sense their confusion. They had absorbed millions of alien minds over the centuries, but this was different. This mind fought back. What are you? The collective asked him. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I am human, Davis replied, though he was not sure if he was speaking or just thinking. Impossible. You are connected to our network. Should be part of us now. Your individual consciousness should be gone. Davis felt the Vex trying to absorb his mind to make him part of their perfect order. But something in his human nature resisted. Every time they tried to organize his thoughts, his memories and emotions shifted in new directions. Why do you fight us? The collective asked. We offer perfection. No more pain, no more confusion, no more chaos. It's just pure, logical order. Davis thought about his life. He remembered growing up on Earth, learning to fight, serving with his friends in the Marines. He remembered making mistakes, feeling afraid, laughing at stupid jokes and caring about people even when it hurt. Because chaos is not a disease, he said. Chaos is what makes us alive. The Vex Collective seemed to pause, processing this idea. For 50,000 years, they had been programmed to see disorder as something to be eliminated. The concept that chaos might be valuable was completely foreign to them. Davis began to share his memories with the collective. It's not by choice, but because the connection worked both ways. The Vex saw through his eyes what it meant to be human. They saw Jake Morrison making the hard decision to split his fleet, knowing that many of his people would die. They saw Mary Lewis and her Marines fighting with primitive weapons because they refused to give up. They saw Captain Stone leading her ship into impossible odds because someone had to try. This is inefficient, the collective said. These humans make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They take unnecessary risks. They refuse to accept when a situation is hopeless. That is exactly the point, Davis replied. We do things that do not make sense because sometimes the impossible is the only option left. The collective began to analyze the human memories, trying to understand them the way they understood everything else. But human experiences could not be reduced to simple data. Love, friendship, hope, and determination were concepts that their logical minds struggled to process. Meanwhile, outside the device, the battle was reaching its end. Admiral Jake Morrison watched as his last few ships fought against overwhelming odds. The USS Defiance, commanded by Captain Stone, spun through enemy fire like a dancer, but her ship was badly damaged. Admiral Stone called over the radio, "My engines are failing. I can give you maybe 5 more minutes." "Understood," Jake replied. "Hold them off as long as you can." Jake looked at the massive device where Davis had disappeared. He had not heard from the sergeant in over 10 minutes. For all he knew, Davis was already dead, and the mission had failed. But then something strange began to happen. The Vex ships stopped firing. They hung in space as if they were waiting for something. Even the device itself seemed to pause, its lights flickering in new patterns inside the collective consciousness. Davis was showing the Vex something they had never seen before. He shared the memory of humans working together despite their differences, of soldiers sacrificing themselves for people they would never meet, of individuals choosing to be part of something larger than themselves without losing who they were. "You want perfect order?" Davis said to the collective. "A perfect order is death. Real life comes from the balance between order and chaos. You need both." "That is illogical," the collective replied. But there was something new in their voice. "Uncertainty," maybe Davis said. "But it works. Look at what humans accomplished. We went from living in caves to traveling between stars in just a few thousand years. We did it because we never stopped questioning, never stopped trying new things, never stopped being individuals, even when we worked together." The Vex collective began to change. Davis could feel it happening. His human perspective was spreading through their network like a virus. But instead of destroying it, it was making it more complex, more alive. "What are you doing to us?" the collective asked. "I am not doing anything," Davis said. "You are doing it to yourselves. You are learning to doubt, to question, to wonder if there might be a better way." Suddenly, the single voice of the collective began to fracture. Davis heard thousands, then millions of individual voices as the Vex consciousness split apart. Each voice was still connected to the others, but now they were individuals rather than parts of a single mind. I am ... dub. Quotes came confused voices from across the galaxy. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Vex were thinking. As individuals, the change was not just mental. The physical device around Davis began to transform. The geometric patterns shifted into more organic shapes. The cold efficiency of the machine gave way to something more complex and beautiful. Outside, Admiral Morrison watched as the Vex ships began to change as well. Their perfect formations broke apart as individual pilots began making their own decisions. Some ships stopped fighting entirely. Others seemed to be arguing with each other over what to do next. "Admiral," came Amy Foster's voice over the radio. "Something incredible is happening. The Vex are becoming individuals. They're developing separate personalities." Jake could hardly believe it. "Is Davis still alive?" "I think so, but he is not." "The same, he is connected to all of them now. He is part of their network, but he is also still human." In the depths of the device, Davis felt himself changing too. He was still Mike Davis, but now he was also something more. He could feel the thoughts and experiences of billions of former Vex drones as they awakened to individual consciousness. "What do we do now?" asked one of the newly individual Vex. Davis thought about it. "Now you learn to be alive. You make your own choices. You make mistakes and learn from them. You care about each other not because you are programmed to, but because you choose to." "And what about the galaxy?" asked another voice. "We have done terrible things. We destroyed entire civilizations." "Then you spend the rest of your existence making up for it," Davis said. "You use your abilities to help instead of harm. You become protectors instead of destroyers." The transformation spread across the galaxy, faster than light itself. On thousands of worlds, Vex machines stopped their work of converting everything to perfect order and began helping the survivors rebuild. Former Vex ships that had been weapons of conquest became rescue vessels, back. At the battle site, Captain Stone brought her damaged ship alongside the USS Vengeance. "Admiral, the Vex ships are standing down. They are actually offering to help repair our damage." Jake looked out at the former enemy fleet. Ships that had been trying to kill them minutes ago were now extending repair arms and sending medical. "SUPPLIESA," new voice came over the communication system. It sounded like Davis, but different, more complex. "Admiral Morrison, this is hard to explain. I am still Mike Davis, but I am also part of something bigger now. The Vex Collective has become a collective of individuals. We are all connected, but we are all free to make our own choices. "Are you all right, son?" Jake asked. "I am better than all right, sir. I am home. And I have a galaxy full of new friends who want to make up for the mistakes of the past." War was over, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of destroying the Vex, humanity had changed them. The machines had learned to be individuals while still being connected. They had learned that chaos and order could exist together. Over the following months, the galaxy began to heal. The Vex used their advanced technology to repair damaged worlds and help refugee populations rebuild their homes. They became the galaxy's guardians, protecting growing civilizations instead of destroying them. Admiral Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, but he knew the real hero was Sergeant Davis, who had sacrificed his individual existence to save everyone while somehow remaining himself. In his final report to Earth Command, Jake wrote, "The galaxy is safe, not because we were the strongest, but because we were the most human. We showed an entire collective consciousness that being different, being chaotic, being individual, is not a weakness to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated." The Vex had wanted to bring perfect order to the galaxy. Instead, they learned that the most perfect thing of all was the beautiful chaos of life itself. And in learning that lesson, they became truly alive for the first time in 50,000 years. Humanity had won the war not by destroying their enemy, but by teaching them to be free. It was the most human victory of all.